Folks who will be presenting today. My name is Daniel Chu, and I'm the Senior Energy Planner here at the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. And I think I'll pass it off first to the point.
Thanks, Daniel. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining today's call. My name is Leslie, and I'm the Environmental Justice Organizer at The Point. I'll pass it over to Abby.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Abby Ramanan, and I'm a project director with Clean Energy Group. I'll pass it over to Ava.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ava Morgan. I'm also with Clean Energy Group. I'm a project manager. I'll pass it to Megan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Carr, and I am an attorney at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest.
All right, thanks, folks. So thank you again for joining today's call for us to talk about the Con Edison rate hikes. I would like to start a little bit about what the Peak Coalition is and introduce what the Peak Coalition is to folks. So the Peak Coalition, our work has mainly been focused on peaker power plants. Peaker power plants are one of the New York City's most egregious environmental injustice examples. On days with extreme weather, like heat waves or sub-zero temperatures, people consume more energy to stay cool or stay warm, which puts excessive demand on the grid. So in response, highly polluting power plants, known as peaker power plants, fire up in places like the South Bronx, in Sunset Park, and other low-income communities of color throughout New York City. These inefficient and expensive peaker power plants spew harmful emissions in communities that are already burdened with all sorts of other environmental impacts, such as the concentration of highways, distribution centers, risks with flooding, and other environmental issues. So, Ali, if you go to the next slide, please. So Peak Coalition came together in 2019 with these 5 organizations. 4 of us are presenting today. Uprose is also another member of this coalition to really focus on peakers as a longstanding burden on the city's most climate vulnerable residents. And we are not just trying to shut down peaker power plants, but really come up with a suite of comprehensive solutions that could equitably reduce utility bills, reduce emissions, and improve public health and make our energy system more resilient, more affordable. Next slide, please. Since we came together in 2019, we've published several reports. These are some of the reports that I'm highlighting here. The Dirty Energy Big Money report, which highlighted how much money peaker power plants cost. The fossil fuel endgame reports, both the first version and the second version called Accelerate Now, to sort of track where peaker power plants are in New York City between the years 2020 and 2024 to see how many of them have actually been in progress to be shut down in compliance with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, New York's landmark climate law, in making sure that we have a zero emissions energy system by the year 2040 and a net zero grid by the year 2050. And then throughout last year, we've sort of shifted away from simply looking at supply and building renewable energy and building battery storage as the only solutions to look at how to phase out peaker power plants, but looking at overall how we can balance the supply and demand of our electricity system, which has to stay in balance constantly. Otherwise, we have blackouts and brownouts. By looking at the demand side of the question. So thinking about how we manage our energy systems, what we value in terms of how we consume, how do consumer behaviors and business behaviors affect the ability for peaker power plants to be phased out. I would go in maybe just for like 2 minutes on some of these reports and how it's relevant to the Con Edison rate hikes that we are seeing today. So in the, if you go to the next slide, in the fossil fuel endgame reports, we've highlighted how peaker plants are the most expensive sources of energy on the grid. And one of the predominant reasons why your energy bills might be so high, especially during the summer, and on occasions, if you live in South Brooklyn in 2023, you'll experience this in winter when you're receiving like $1,000 of electricity bills, right? Our report found out that peaker power plants on average cost about $450 million a year to keep online. And developing distributed clean energy sources like solar, wind, other kinds of renewables in a local manner is one of the ways that we can build a grid that only truly serves all New Yorkers. But as I mentioned about our shift away from looking simply only at supply solutions, we're also looking at sort of the high cost of distribution charges that are sort of on a regular basis higher than the cost of energy itself. Yet they do not represent the necessary investments that we believe can help communities phase out our reliance on expensive fossil fuel power plants, even when some of these solutions from the distribution side or the demand side are faster and cheaper to implement than obviously developing large renewable energy infrastructures that could take decades at the time. Next slide, please. So why are we focused on Con Edison? So as I mentioned, there's sort of the supply side of the question that we've been looking at for the past few years. And now we're slowly pivoting to look at the distribution and demand side of the question. Why Con Edison matters in this case is that Con Edison is the distribution monopoly here in New York City. So they have disproportionate power in controlling how electricity is distributed into households, which households get to have electricity and doesn't have electricity when there's a blackout or brownout. And they are extremely relevant in sort of the deeper need to change how our electricity grid works in general to make sure that a just transition away from all of these dirty fossil fuel power is necessary. Next slide, please. So just to summarize sort of peak coalition's work and our relevance in looking at Con Edison and dealing with the rate hikes and talking to you and sharing with you all what we see is problematic about the rate hikes, you can see that peaker plans really is a combination of high demand, dirty energy, a lot of money, and very low efficiency, whereas peaker alternatives typically require local renewables and battery storage. However, demand management must and has to also be part of that solution. And when I'm talking about sort of distribution charges or delivery charges and why your rates might be so high and where Con Ed is trying to, again, hike your rates is can be seen through all of your electricity bills. So if you live in New York City, when you pay for electricity from Con Edison and you get a bill and you read that bill, you'll see on the first page about how much you're paying on a monthly basis, right? But on the second page, Con Edison typically breaks down where your charges are coming from. So your supply charges are what's on the left, and your delivery charges here is highlighted in red. And as we will break down further in this webinar, a lot of times your delivery charges are not just paying for your electricity, right? You're not paying for resources being generated, fossil fuels being burned, or sun energy being absorbed, or wind power being harvested in order to produce your energy. That's all supply charges. Sometimes the supply charges are very low. Typically, they are lower than delivery charges, right? But sometimes supply charges, because they are unpredictable, they can go up to hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But on a month-to-month basis, on average, right, delivery charges represent one of the most expensive part of a typical household's electricity bills. And that's what we are focusing on and trying to deal with on this call today.
Okay, everyone. So thank you so much, Daniel, for introducing this. And my colleagues are going to talk more about what Con Ed is saying they need your money for and the investments they're going to make. Before we delve into that, I want to talk about this rate case process and why we have this in the first place and what it really means. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before talking about what exactly this proceeding looks like, we want to understand, why do we have this process? Why does Con Ed and other utilities have to go through this long, complex proceeding before they raise prices? That's because Con Ed, like many other utilities, is a regulated monopoly. To drill down on that, Con Ed is a corporation beholden to shareholders. At the end of the day, their bottom line is to raise profit. That's their reason for existing. While they are also a corporation that provides the essential service of electricity, gas, and steam to millions of people living in their service territory. This is obviously different than how many other companies work. So while all businesses are able to pass costs along to consumers to some extent, there's a difference between other businesses and investor-owned utilities like Con Ed. So New York City residents obviously have no choice which utility they use, and utility services are essential. So, if the store down the street where I go to buy candy raises their prices, I can, one, go to a different store, or two, I can stop buying the candy because I don't technically need it. When your bills go up with Con Ed, you can neither find another provider because there isn't one that can service you, nor can you stop using electricity. This is obviously a horrible situation for the consumer, and especially bad for low to moderate income households and those with fixed incomes. So because of this, Con Ed has to go through a rate case, a regulatory proceeding, in order to raise their prices. And because of both the power of Con Ed, which we just talked about, and the real vulnerability of the consumer, these requested rate hikes deserve the utmost scrutiny from both the utility regulator and from the public, which includes all of you. Next slide, please. So rate cases happen before the Public Service Commission, which is the utility regulator. You will hear me also say the Department of Public Service, or GPS, which is just the staff arm, the worker bees of the Public Service Commission. So rate cases begin with the company filing, and they're supposed to last around 11 months. They often last longer, especially with a large service territory and a lot of customers like Con Ed. So in this case, Con Ed filed at the end of January 2025. Technically, this rate case should be done by the end of this calendar year. So companies will file. They will ask to increase the bills that the ratepayers have to pay, aka the delivery charges that Daniel was just talking about. They will provide thousands of pages of documents explaining what the money is needed for, the investments they want or need to make. An administrative law judge, also known as an ALJ, will preside over the case. They'll hear evidence and make recommendations. So this is filed with the Public Service Commission, a 7-member body that is appointed by the governor and responsible for ensuring that New Yorkers receive safe and reliable utility service at just and reasonable rates without unjust discrimination. They make decisions and issue orders for regulated utilities like Con Ed to follow. Now, anyone can intervene in a rate case, technically speaking. It's as simple as submitting a form with some pretty basic information, but it is often resource intensive, and effective intervention, actually getting to shape the outcome, is incredibly inaccessible. Common interveners in a Con Ed rate case may include the City of New York, which obviously has an interest. Organizations like Earth Justice and the Public Utility Law Project tends to break down into general categories of affected municipalities, nonprofits that have an interest in consumer protection, economic justice, and environmental justice, as well as interveners that have an interest in the utility industry and maximizing profit. And of course, the filer already has that interest. There are 2 tracks. There's a litigated track and a confidential settlement negotiations. I have bolded the latter because that is that is the track that this most often takes. For this latter track, negotiations continue until a joint proposal is filed, and this is how things most often end. So just as it sounds, a joint proposal is what the parties have agreed upon. You need to have at least 2 parties agreeing, which is going to be the utility and DPS, and the interveners may partially support, wholly support, partially object, or wholly object, or just be neutral to it. This is a very long, complicated process, and I'm skipping a lot. There's a lot of detail that frankly we don't have to dive into to have some major takeaways. And the most important things I want folks to really understand about the process is that there's a significant exchange and verification of information. Lawyers exchange interrogatories, get to ask questions, significant evidence is introduced, there's cross-examination. An enormous amount of information goes into this, but it happens behind closed doors. It is a long, complicated, expensive, time-intensive process. There are several multi-hour meetings on a daily basis covering so many different topics that it is difficult for even a well-informed organization to get involved and have a meaningful impact. And to be able to really shape things, it helps to be a really large organization or business with a lot of money to put forth toward the outcome. And that money often goes to attorneys' fees and paying technical experts. And it's worth highlighting that, Con Ed brings their attorneys to these proceedings. And the money that they pay those attorneys is also a cost that is passed along to the ratepayer. Next slide, please. So as you can tell, we think there are a lot of issues with these process that negatively affect the communities we're serving. So first, rate cases affect nearly everyone. We all have bills, but very few understand how it works. And of course, this has a disproportionate impact in low to moderate income households and fixed income households. There is a significant exchange of important information that only a small group have access to during confidential negotiations. Con Ed has every incentive to overcharge ratepayers because at the end of the day, their goal is to maximize profit. And the Department of Public Service also has an incentive to under scrutinize utilities. And this is because utilities are providing this essential service. Everyone knows and understands, blackouts are dangerous. Failures in utility service are obviously something that we want and need to avoid because the impacts can be catastrophic. But because Con Ed has the role of being the utility provider, they receive a lot of deference from the Department of Public Service, which certainly does not want to look bad or be on the hook for any failures when it comes to utility service. So DPS has an incentive to really under scrutinize the utilities and give them whatever they say they need. And as we just talked about, they have an incentive to say they need a lot more money than they might actually. As I said, intervention is costly. Not many organizations or certainly affected individuals have the ability to do that. And lastly, rate increases are cumulative. Bills just keep going up. When the people's bills go up after this rate case, it will be an addition and add on to the increases from 3 years ago. Bills keep going up despite the fact that people are not getting any more money or economic security to pay them. Next slide.
So we're all gathered here today because this rate case is going to impact us, and Con Ed is going to be increasing your bills again. In the beginning of this year, they just filed with the Public Service Commission to increase revenues. And as Megan was explaining, essentially what a rate case is when a utility company requests permission from the Public Service Commission to adjust its rates. So this could mean anywhere from operational costs to cost of management to need for more infrastructure, whatever that case is. Con Ed is essentially asking the Public Service Commission, hey, we need higher rates because we need to pay certain things. And essentially what this is that it's us having to pay for the cost of Con Ed's bills. And this is extremely important because the bills are already way too damn high, and cost of living is too. Next slide. So Con Ed is proposing that we get a raise in electric bills by 11.4%. So that's almost 12% that each of us are going to be seeing in an increase when it comes to paying our monthly utility bills. Gas bills are also going to be increased by 13.2%. Today, we're going to be specifically diving into electric bills and how that is broken down. But gas bills are also going to be increased in your utility bill. So what all of this means is that we're all going to be seeing an average monthly household bill increase by about $50. Obviously, this ranges for everybody depending on your utility bill. But again, this is extremely important because our community is the one that is paying for the cost of Con Ed's increase in rate, in profit, in operations, and all of that. And our communities are already way too overburdened by the pollution that Con Ed produces through power plants and through their dirty fossil fuel production. So having an increase in our utility bills means that we're essentially paying for our poor public health, for our poor air quality, and for higher utility bills that we already can't afford. Next slide, please.
So today our focus is going to be on the electric bill side of things because P Coalition works mainly on electricity issues. As Leslie has mentioned, electric bills will be increasing by 11.4%. That's what's on your bill and how much you're paying in total, so not just the delivery charges. And gas bills by 13.2%, which results in an average monthly increase by $50. But I think it's worth scrutinizing a little bit in more detail what the electric bill side of thing and the increases actually would look like from Con Ed's perspective so that we could better understand what's wrong with it, and how we might want to change it. Next slide, please. So even though your bill will be increasing by 11.4%, Con Ed is actually proposing to increase the electric delivery revenue by 18%, or approximately 1.6 billion US dollars. They estimate that this will increase your monthly bills by 2660 on average. So that's if you are a Con Ed customer for electricity, but a National Grid customer when you pay for gas, that's how much you will be expected to see your bills increasing. And that's only from the delivery charges side of things. So if there is a sudden increase in, say, the price of fossil fuels and supply charges increase suddenly, or if the summer is typically very hot, hotter than usual, which we're expecting it to be hotter than usual anyway these days under climate change, you might be paying a lot more than just 26.60. So why does this matter? Next slide, please.
So as we mentioned earlier, utility bills are already way too high, but New York City has some of the highest energy bills in the entire country. And as we were explaining earlier, Con Ed has all of the power to do that and all of the feasibility in the world because that is the only provider that we have in New York City. And disadvantaged communities are already overburdened by high energy costs and pollution. Again, we don't want higher bills. We don't want more power plants to keep running to have our energy supply, and we want different things instead. However, this is going to be impacting communities like the South Bronx, like Sunset Park, and like other disadvantaged communities in New York City. And our people are the ones that are going to have to be paying for that. And so when you add on a higher cost of living in any case possible, whether that's through utility bills, that means that you are not using that money to satisfy certain survival needs. And that also includes upgrading to energy efficient appliances that would improve your current environment conditions, whether that's indoors or just through general home repairs. And so again, having higher utility bills does limit people from paying for certain things that would benefit their health. Next slide, please.
So we mentioned that Con Ed's raising your bills and to raise their revenues by $1.6 billion. Where is that money going? After we read through parts of the thousands of pages that Megan mentioned that Con Ed has filed with the Department of Public Service, here is a rough breakdown of where Con Ed is planning on distributing those $1.6 billion of rate increases that they are planning on raising next year. I sort of singled out and highlighted the profit section of this because Con Ed is proposing that a good chunk of this is actually going to their basically return on equity, which is their profit. That's guaranteed profit for Con Edison that pretty much they don't have to do any work for except to collect that money from all of us. But as you can see, sort of the $1.6 billion in rate increase is also going to a lot of different pockets as well, right? You have some going to infrastructure, and we'll sort of break that down a little bit on what it means for Con Ed to be spending on infrastructure and what it means for Con Edison to spend on operations and maintenance. But one thing to point out here is also that the largest chunk of rate increases actually comes from property taxes. Con Edison is one of the largest property taxpayers in New York City. They contribute some of the highest amount of property tax revenues to New York City government. And New York City government and Con Edison, New York City is essentially planning on raising or expected to raise property taxes by around $400 million on all of Con Edison's privately owned properties in New York City and obviously parts of the service territory in Westchester that Con Ed also serves in this. And that actually contributes to about 30% of the amount of rate increases in this process. So, out of the entire chunk of where the rates are going, you have about 30% already going to property taxes that may or may not be reasonable, given that we already pay taxes to New York City, and New York City already generates a lot of revenue. It just seems like a sort of go around in terms of how the city can collect property taxes from folks without obviously being clear on that, as well as sort of net profits that Con Edison is proposing. Next slide, please. So the increase in profit for Con Edison is not just a leveled increase in profit, right? Con Edison has proposed to increase as well their return on equity to about 10.10%, about $200 million of additional guaranteed profits. So Con Ed already has about 9% of guaranteed return on equity today. So about 9% of your delivery charges is going to Con Edison's profits. They're planning on raising that and not decreasing it by any amount, but actually increasing it by $200 million starting next year. Next slide, please.
Another really concerning thing that we saw while we were looking through some of the filings is that in the next few years, Con Ed plans to increase their efforts to collect overdue bills. These are also called arrears. Next slide, please. So out of the operations and maintenance sort of chunk of the rate increases that Daniel was speaking about, there is a bucket called customer operations expenses, and they're planning on increasing this by about 79 million. And so out of that bucket, almost 80% is going to hiring people to increase the efforts to collect arrears or these overdue bills. So that's hiring people to call and receive calls about the overdue bills, hiring folks to go into the field, into communities and knock on doors to collect overdue bills, posted increases for increased, paper bill notifications. And then also they're expecting to receive a lot more customer complaints due to the increased effort to collect these arrears. And so hiring folks to deal with that. And so, yeah, that's 80% of this bucket is to hire more people to essentially harass folks that already cannot pay their bills. In comparison, out of this bucket, only 1.8%, only 21% is going to hiring people to support programs that help. 21% is going to, hiring other people. And out of that 21%, only 1.5 million is going to hiring additional staff for programs that help customers like Energy Affordability Program and Statewide Solar for All. So that is 1.8% of this entire bucket. And so that discrepancy is really large. And so essentially they want to increase rates in order to hire people to collect bills from people who already can't pay the bills. And so these rate hikes will make electricity even less affordable, which will likely lead to more arrears and more overdue bills. So this is a huge concern in looking at the different buckets that Con Ed wants to increase and the different programs that they want to sort of put money to. Not a lot of money going to energy affordability programs, but a lot of money going to collecting overdue bills. Next slide, please.
So as Ava alluded to, and as you all might be wondering, given that Con Ed is increasing rates significantly and is clearly going to be pursuing, collection of overdue bills, again, mostly from folks who already can't afford their energy bills and are going to be doubly unable to afford their energy bills when these rates are increased. You may be wondering if there's anything in this rate hike going towards energy assistance programs or other programs that can help folks who are, experiencing overly high bills that they can't afford to pay. So these programs, there are energy assistance programs available to folks who are unable to pay their energy bills, and we will provide some resources towards the end of this presentation to help folks get connected with those. However, those programs obviously have sort of very fixed budgets, and there isn't a significant amount of new funding from this rate increase that is going towards those programs, even though we know for a fact that folks are going to be struggling to deal with this rate hike. So only out of sort of the total increase that we've kind of talked about, only about 2.7 million of that funding, or 0.8% of the increase, is going towards programs that directly help households deal with increases in their electricity bills. 1.5 million of that, as Ava mentioned, is going towards hiring new staff for the Energy Affordability Program and Statewide Solar for All. Those are two programs that are supportive of folks, both getting some assistance with their energy bills and also potentially pursuing access to renewable energy and forms of electrification that can also help them sort of shelter from increases in fossil fuel prices and just lead to overall decarbonization and reduced dependence on fossil fuels generally. And then there's 1.2 million that is going towards what they're calling a multifamily affordable electrification pilot. This will be a pilot that gives folks living in affordable housing energy credits on their bills to help insulate them from increases on their bills due to a shift from sort of a central fossil fuel-based heating to having in-unit heat pumps, which is, again, part of electrifying these buildings and is generally a good thing. But 1.2 million for this pilot is only going to go to about 400 households and is not going to be nearly enough for folks who are, one, interested in having access to electrified heating and not being dependent on a fossil fuel asset for heating, and are going to be experiencing just an increase in electric bills overall, even without that shift from a fossil fuel based heating to electrified heating. So it's a pretty small percentage of the overall increase that is really going towards folks who are going to need it the most to deal with the increase in their electricity bills, unfortunately. Next slide.
So how do we organize against this? How do we deal with the Con Edison red hat? What are some sort of potential opportunities or ways that you can first reduce your personal energy burden, as well as on a larger level, where and how we can fight against a system that maybe overall doesn't work for us. So I'll start with talking about sort of some ways that you can personally reduce your energy bills. Number one is that if you qualify, New York State has what we call the Energy Affordability Program, or EAP program. It's a statewide program that helps with energy burden. So if you do qualify, and you can go on to Con Edison website to check out if you are qualified or not. There are also other sort of payments and assistance plans available to you. You can file this form with Con Edison and make sure that you go through the process and receive some funding and help towards your own personal electricity bills. But that's on a personal level. Next slide, please. On a sort of rate hike perspective, right, the current rate hike that Con Edison has proposed is going through the rate case process. And even though it is difficult for the public to be litigating alongside lawyers that we pay for Con Edison to fight for raising their revenues, you can still submit comments, and the Public Service Commission do take seriously most comments that are submitted onto each of the rate cases. There's a really simple process of looking up the DPS case number that is attached here, but also linked in chat right now. And you can submit your comment, letting the Department of Public Service know and the Public Service Commissioners know that they should not be voting to approve these rate hikes coming and being proposed by Con Edison. And sort of the third sort of everyday strategy that you could use is to reduce your energy bills automatically by enrolling in what we call the demand response programs. So on ConEd's website, but also if you live in New York, most of the service territories and most electricity providers will have that sort of link for you. Is that you can enroll with what Con Edison call a smart usage partner. It's an odd system in which Con Edison actually doesn't administer the system itself, but they contract out to third-party providers in implementing those. But essentially, when there is a hike in energy prices or there's a potential destabilization event that will cause blackouts and brownouts, you may be able to sort of shut off your lights or reduce power on your fridge or electricity in other ways, turn off your AC. Some of these can actually be done automatically with really small and smart devices that you can just have in your household that cost less than $10. Sometimes these companies will provide you with devices for free. That will not only reduce your bills, but also make our grid overall cleaner and overall more resilient. So if you live in sort of the Con Ed electricity service zone, you can look up whether or not you qualify to participate in any one of these smart usage partners and reduce your own personal energy bills as well and help our grid a little bit cleaner. But there are obviously sort of systemic issues and struggles that we are thinking about, right? Because you see a lot of these investment allocations are not in the right places. So I'll let Leslie speak a little bit more on sort of overall what we would like to see more from the investments that Con Edison is proposing.
Thanks, Daniel. So as we've heard so far, essentially, bills are unaffordable. Con Ed is saying like, hey, you guys already can't afford your bills, so we're going to make them even more expensive because we need the money for that. And so while they're doing that, and as we saw in Daniel's previous slides, that only about 25% of those costs are going to be allocated to infrastructure. So whether or not that means renewable, there's very little that is actually going to be invested when it comes to renewable energy. All of their other costs include revenue, profit, operations, maintenance, and whatnot. And again, we're paying for all of that. And so where are we recommending for that investment to go instead? So instead of us having higher bills that we already can't afford, we need energy solutions that would lower the costs and would lower pollution in general. So instead of investing in more fossil fuel infrastructure, we really want general spending that would improve the health of our communities, that would make our energy bills more affordable and more accessible. So one of the suggestions that we have is to close down peaker plants. So New York City's peaker plants run on dirty fossil fuels and are located in communities that are already suffering from high rates of asthma and pollution. So for example, in the South Bronx, we have 4 power plants running on an ongoing basis. And coincidentally, we also happen to have one of the highest rates of asthma in the entire country. So there is a direct link to that. And our suggestion is so that we can have a part of our money and the utility bills that we are paying for so that it can be invested into closing down and retiring peaker plants so that we can transition to other methods of receiving our energy. If we do have something along those lines or that kind of process, we also want to advocate for energy justice and energy affordability. Again, we cannot afford our bills. So we want to make sure that there are more energy affordability programs, that utility bills reduce on its own, and that our communities are the ones that receive that prioritization when it comes to those applications and when it comes to receiving some kind of assistance. And to that, we would want to have our money invested in renewable energy sources that make our communities and our energy supply more resilient. So that could mean supporting projects like community solar and battery storage instead of sourcing the power plants that continue to pollute our air and also run on fossil fuel. So that would allow renters and low-income residents to benefit from renewable energy savings, which means that we can invest our money in things that are more important for our health instead of just peaker plants. Next slide, please. Oh, and also before I move on, I want to let everybody know that if in any point of the conversation or in the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them onto the chat. We have a few already, but we are going to be answering those later on. So anything along the way, please go ahead. And next slide, please.
So what do we want to see out of this rate case process, right? Megan mentioned it started in January. It'll probably go for about 11 months if it goes all to plan and schedule, and the rate hikes will kick in next year. What we want to see out of a publicly accountable rate case is that Con Edison needs to have a limited to no rate hikes, right? 18% increase in delivery charges is simply unacceptable. That will raise hundreds of dollars in terms of energy bills and costs per year on residents, sometimes up to thousands. So that's basically the bottom line, that Con Ed should not have such high increase in their rates. But at the same time, they should have level or decreased profit margins, right? They currently have a 9% profit margin, which is already very high and higher than most companies make these days. And that's out of sort of basically publicly guaranteed dollars, right? Raising it to more than 10% is actually way too much. We believe that the Public Service Commission should either level or keep the same profit margin, not allow for increased profit margins, but actually also look at what are the possibilities to decrease those profit margins as much as possible in Con Edison. At the same time, we're not saying Con Ed shouldn't spend on anything, or like a distribution utility should not spend on anything, right? We need to spend more on affordability assistance. We need to spend more on clean energy infrastructure. We need to spend more on climate change resilient infrastructures, distributed energy sources, demand side management. These are all things that are currently, in our view, underfunded and needs a lot more money and funding to be implemented so that our grid can be cleaner and more resilient, right? So that is something that we think actually deserves a lot more funding. And as Ava and Abby has broken down, currently doesn't get a lot of funding from Con Edison. And on a longer term, sort of not just in blocking what's bad and investing in what's good, we also need to find alternative ways to resolve arrears problem, right? A lot of folks are behind on their energy bills. I think there needs to be a more systemic look into why folks are behind and what other ways that we can resolve the challenge of folks not being able to pay for energy without sort of hiring 300 new staff to go after households that are already overburdened by work and energy. And finally, I think New York City, the New York City government, the mayor's office, and Con Edison, and sort of whoever else is associated with this part of the process need to resolve the property tax burden question that Con Edison currently is trying to put down onto all New Yorkers as well. But these are just some of our preliminary thoughts from obviously going through the hundreds of pages of documents that Con Edison has proposed. We still want to build this new vision of what our energy systems should look like with you. And so Leslie will go into sort of, this is just the start of what we are planning right now, and this is just the start of our efforts this year. We are planning on holding a lot more events, not just virtually like this, but also in person to talk about how you can work with us to figure out how to make sure that Con Edison doesn't have a rate hike like this and put all the burdens on all of us.
Thank you, Daniel. So how can we organize around this? How can we prevent something that like this to continue to happen in the next couple of years? So you can plug in at our next peak events. We're having a webinar right now, giving an introduction of what a rate hike is and how it's going to be impacting you. But we are also going to be having more opportunities so that you could tell Con Ed about how you feel about the rate case, and we can workshop a testimony together so that we can submit it. And this is going to be in the spring or summer at the Point, at Uprose, and at other NEJA member neighborhoods. So please stay tuned for our upcoming events so that we can workshop something around what we need to tell Con Ed and the talking points that we need to come up with together. After that, you're also going to get a chance to voice how you're going to be impacted by the rate case. So again, that testimony workshop, and we're going to be able to have the opportunity to have state agencies in the room. So we'd love to have Con Ed, we'd love to have other agencies that are in charge of this rate case process. And that is going to be in either the summer or the fall. And we will be sharing all of those details as we finalize logistics and as we plan everything together. So essentially, we're not going against the rate case itself, but rather the rate hike and how much we're being charged and where all of this money is going. So we have an opportunity to come together and to voice our opinions to Con Ed and other agencies about how this is impacting us and what we should have instead. Next slide, please. So you have the opportunity to let us know if you have any questions right now. You can drop your thoughts in the chat, and you can let us know what changes you want to see in New York City's energy system. All of this feedback is important for us so that we can shape our next workshop and so that we can come together to strategize how we're going to target the people that are responsible for this rate hike. So again, opening up the conversation for any of the questions that you guys may have. The chat box is available for you guys.